Hi, and thank you for joining me. There are quite a few definitions of slow stitching around, but the heart of it, most of them refer to simply enjoying the process of stitching without having the pressure of trying to create something perfect. I'm Susan from Sew Peaceful, and in this video today I'm going to work through creating a mug rug using techniques that are based on the Kawandi style of patchwork. As I show you how I'll make the project, I'll talk about the origins of Kawandi and look at some of the ways that this style of stitching can be adapted for different purposes. If you think this might be of interest to you, please stick around and we'll get started. You might already be familiar with boro and sashiko, which are Japanese techniques. Kawandi is a traditional method of making a quilt that's practiced by the city people of southern India whose roots are in Africa. Kawandi simply means quilt in English. While I've adopted parts of their process, my work is not at all trying to be authentic, and there are many other things that the city people add to their quilts. When you get a chance, please take the opportunity to look online to find examples of traditional work. It's quite fascinating to see these ladies working. Some of the things, though, that you'll find in Kawandi quilts, firstly, are that the work starts from the outside. The outside edges are enclosed first of all. Because of this, we need to know how big we want our piece to be before we start. So there may be a bit of planning ahead required. Second one is that there are no raw edges. Unlike boro, the edges of each piece of fabric that's used are folded under, and we'll work through that process as we do the mug rug. The other thing that I have practiced is the technique of stitching, which starts from the outside and goes in a continuous line, very much like a maze, I imagine. Just continues on from the outside and goes into the center. In this piece, I have used a single colored thread, and this one under here, I've used a multicolored thread, but you can use, it's a good way to use up whatever you have. Traditionally, people making Kawandi quilts would be using recycled, saris or clothing to make their quilts. Tend to use coordinating fabric ranges. If you've got, a packet of 5-inch squares that you had no idea what you're going to do with, that's a great way to get started with this. So what are the requirements? We have mug rug kits available in our store, but if you're using things from your own stash, this is what you'll need. Firstly, a backing fabric. Keep in mind that because we're going to be hand stitching through several layers, the lighter the fabrics or more loosely woven, the easier that will be. Your backing fabric will need to be the size of your finished project. So if you're making a table runner, for example, consider the size first and cut your backing fabric with enough extra to turn over your seam allowances on the outside edge. Secondly, you'll need some batting or wadding, and again, consider the fact that you're going to be hand stitching through it. So something lightweight is better. Because I'm making a mug rug, I need a little extra thickness to protect the table, so I'd use either Parlin or Pellin. But if you've got some lightweight batting scraps, that'll be fine. You could also use a piece of flannelette or muslin. Finally, you'll need fabric for the top. If you're using fabrics from your stash, I'm sure you'll have plenty. But if you want to know how much fabric you might need, I cover the backing fabric with my little pieces of fabric and make sure I've covered it at least twice and maybe a bit extra for luck. Now, keep in mind that you will need to turn under the raw edges. So, and the smaller that you cut your pieces, the more pieces that you're going to need. Depending on the size of the finished project, I cut my pieces into squares or rectangles up to 4 to 5 inches, but the larger the pieces, you'll soon have it finished. If I'm just working on a small project like this, I tend to cut them a bit smaller. Next thing that you'll need is a good needle. If you've got our kit, I've got a size 7 crewel needle in there, but what you're looking for is something that is sharp will hold your embroidery thread, 2 or 3 strands at least, and preferably will hold several stitches at a time, so the longer the needle the better. Your thread, I've just used embroidery floss, but if you've got pearl thread or sashiko thread, it certainly doesn't need to be all in one colour. So if you've got a lot of little pieces in your thread box that you don't know what to do with, this is a great opportunity to use them. While it isn't absolutely necessary, I do find a roller presser or a finger presser or an iron handy to press over the seams, but your finger will do the job just as well. You'll need a few pins, and some thread wax, if you've got it, is also handy. It just helps your thread to go through the layers. And let's get started. If you have one of our kits, it'll come with the edges of your backing fabric folded over a piece of purlin. There are 2 ways to get started. We can start with the purlin inside the edge, or we can remove it and stitch it without the purlin. It's a little harder to stitch the first round with the purlin in it because of those thicker edges, but I do find it easier. The second method is to put the purlin in after you've put the first round of fabric on, and I'll show you how to do that. So it's really a matter of personal preference. To start with, we're going to take the first piece of fabric, and if you're right-handed, you'll start in this first right-hand corner. If you're left-handed, you would probably start in the left-hand corner and work this way. So because I'm right-handed, I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to start with this piece of fabric. And again, all the fabrics are cut in different sizes and shapes, and there's certainly no rhyme or reason to that, but I do find squares and rectangles the easiest to work with. So because I'm going to put it in this corner, I'm going to need to turn over this right-hand side and the bottom edge, because they're the ones that are going to be in that corner. So I'm looking to roughly have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on that side, and then on this bottom edge as well. Now, no measuring here, it's just what I think looks like a 1/4 inch, and it's really to make sure it's well tucked under. Once I've got that, those edges under, I'll line that up with the edge of my backing fabric, and I'm going to put a pin in there just to hold it in position while I get the next piece of fabric ready. Now, again, there are no real requirements or rhyme or reason. You could start stitching at that point if you wanted to, but I like to lay out my first row of fabric. So when I've got my second piece, then same deal as the first one. The bottom edge is going to get tucked under, and then the choice is completely yours. You can either tuck this fabric under that one, in which case you would need to turn the edge under here, or you can fold the edge here and position it over the top. And I tend to base my decision then on how much I like the piece of fabric, or how big the piece of fabric is that I'm using first. If I wanted to see more of the yellow, I would put it on top. If I wanted to see more of the green, I might put the green one on top. Okay. Next piece. I get up to this corner, just going to get that piece that will fit up to that corner, and you'll notice that I've had then to press under 3 sides to make sure that that will seam allowance is covered on all 3 edges. So at that point then I would start to stitch. When we're ready to stitch, we can use, as I mentioned, embroidery floss, whatever you've got really, and you don't have to go out and buy new thread if you've got lots of little bits that you can choose from. If you're using stranded embroidery thread, look, I know we often talk about, you know, cutting your thread from your fingertip to your elbow. I tend to go a little bit bigger with this, again, because it's inconvenient having to change. But if you've got stranded embroidery threads, just hold that strand of thread, the bunch of threads together in your hand, and just pull each thread out individually, so that you've got, if you're using 2 or 3, they will come out together. No need to use your teeth or anything else, and lay them out side by side. If you've had them on a floss card, as I have, I just run my fingers through them a couple of times just to help straighten them out a little bit. But by separating those threads, you'll get a much nicer stitch. And as I said, 2 or 3 strands, it's completely up to you. When you've got your needle threaded, then pop a knot in the bottom. Just collect this one. And if you've got some thread wax, I recommend you use that too, because we're going through a few layers. It is easier to get them through, to get your needle and thread through. What I'd like to do then, in fact, all through this project, I've got a little knot in my bottom there. I like to start my knot underneath my fold. So wherever I have to start and stop my thread, I like to put it under a fold. So if I can feel myself running out of thread, I'll go to the next fold and pop it under there to tie off. So putting my needle and thread up underneath a fold there, I'm just going to start with my stitch. So my knot's tucked well underneath, and come up through the top. And we're going to be stitching approximately 1/8 of an inch away from the outside edge for our first round, so that we make sure we capture those seam allowances in there. So no measuring required. It's just very rough measurement. And you don't need to stress about having straight stitches or anything like that. Obviously, where all those seams join together, the folds join together, it is going to be a little bit harder to pull through. And the first round, particularly when I've got my purlin in there, the first round will always be the hardest. Once we get past that outside edge, it will get easier. What I like to do is try and put a few stitches on my needle at the same time, and by doing that, your stitches will end up being a little bit straighter than if you were to do them individually. When you get up to your first folded piece of fabric, pop your needle down through that folded edge. You see that there? Making sure I've got my seams tucked under there nice and neatly. But if you pop your needle down through that folded edge, just make sure that you catch your folds in your stitching line. So as you continue stitching along there, you just need to make sure that you pull your work out as flat as you can get it, because we don't want it to gather up, which it's inclined to do if we don't keep pulling it out nice and flat as we go. Once you get up to the corner, we'll put just a couple of stitches in the corner and turn the corner. So we're not going to go back along that line, we're going to continue on around the corner, tucking in on the corner as we go. Try and get everything lined up so it looks as neat as possible. And we'll just continue on. Sometimes when you've got a really thick area like that, it's easier just to do 1 or 2 stitches at a time. But we're going around the corner and then we'll continue on. And then when we get up to the end of this piece, that's when we start adding on more of our fabrics. Now, I just have to mention, because I had a mixture of fabrics, and it's completely, the order that you put them in is completely up to you. I have a little embellishment, a little flower that I'm going to put in the middle, and because of that I'm choosing to put my darker fabrics on the outside and the lighter fabrics will go in the middle. But however you do it, it's completely up to you. You might mix them up, you might like to have all one colour. Yeah, purely your preference. You know, if you wanted to do it all in greens or all in blues, or, you know, complete mix match, you know, it's just personal preference. Your pieces will all be different sizes. Some will be longer or taller than others, some will be shorter, but we don't need to worry about that at all. That's all part of having a nice scrappy process. So what I like to try and do when I get to you know, a corner, is if I've got a bit that's a bit extra long, you know, if that had been extra long, I would have, you know, tried to bring it up to the corner, but it's not. So I might choose another piece and trim it down to go on, you know, so it will fit in. I don't, you know, have any particular rules, just what fits, you know. And with this one, for example, it's just a little one, but it will go in the corner, and then I will be able to fold over once again all 3 sides so it covers the corner. I'll continue to stitch then and go round to where we started, and come back to you at that point. So once you've gone around the ring or around the outside edge once, if you haven't already put your batting in, now is the time to do that. You can just pull back your first row of pieces and tuck your batting into the corners. You might just need a little tool, whatever you've got, a point turner maybe, something like that, just to push it into the corners, and saves yourself the hassle of having to stitch through it. But as I say, I've tried both, and my preference is to start with it in it, but please try them both. So we've gone around the whole ring now. What we're going to do is just to continue to go around that I call it a ring, sorry, but it's actually a rectangle, continue to stitch around in that same direction. And so we're going to move over about 1/4 inch. Now you can, if you would like, to mark lines, with an invisible marker, which we have available in our store, and a ruler. If you want to mark lines, if you feel more comfortable marking in straight lines, your stitching lines need to be between 1/4 and 1/2 of an inch apart. It makes sure that it holds down all your folds nicely. If you'd like to go round, say 1/2 an inch apart, then you can always go back and put lines in between. But we'll just continue to stitch, moving our needle and thread across. You can use your fingernail as a bit of a guide to what's 1/4 an inch. I find my thumbnail's a pretty good judge of that distance, and we'll continue to go round then in the same direction. I've lost my needle and thread. Continuing to stitch around, going in the same direction until the point where we need to add in another piece of fabric. So when you get to what would be your smallest piece, and I'm thinking that one there is probably my shortest piece, that's when we'll have to add on an extra piece of fabric. So I'll continue to stitch, and then I'll come back when I get up to that point. I've stitched around a couple of times now, and I'm up to this point where I really need to add an extra piece on here, because if I'm to stitch along here, this one is too short. So I've chosen another piece of fabric, and I've pressed under the two of the edges. So I'll need to put one edge over this piece here, so it covers up the raw edge underneath it. And I can then decide, because this is a nice long piece, I could decide to put it over there and cover up half my yellow one, or I could just tuck it under there, because I've already got this side pressed under on that piece. This one would fit nicely under there, and I'll just trim it off there. Otherwise, I find that I'm going to be stitching through a lot of different fabrics, and I'll put that piece aside, and it might be useful to cover a corner. So I'm going to just pin that one in there while I stitch it. And because I've got my needle and thread here, I'm going to come into this seam allowance there, and I'm going to stitch right across, continuing, and what you'll notice is it's not going to be the exact same distance between as there was between there and there. This one will be a little bit different, but what's important is that I will catch that seam in there. So like I've said, there's no need to get the ruler out and measure. This is not about being perfect, but just enjoying the process. So as we stitch, go across there, making sure that we catch in all those seams so they're tucked down. Now, as happens from time to time, it's not, and you'll notice I've just ducked down there again, so I can do this same thing, and that is to get across the edge there. Look, if you do find that you've missed catching a seam in and it looks like it wants to pop open on you, absolutely nothing wrong with going back later on. You can either just get a needle and a thread and do an invisible applique stitch to hold it down. You might even put in an extra row of stitching. The quilt police will not be out to make life miserable for you. So we'll continue on, and I'm going to be adding my fabric When I get into the middle, then I'm going to come back and just show you about putting on those last few pieces. The closer you get into the middle, the more likely it is that you're going to need to cover three raw edges. With this piece, for example, you'll see that I've got this section here, across here, and up here where I'm going to need to place a piece of fabric. Now, I could just put one large one and cover that whole section there, or I could just put a small one and you know, cover those three sections there. It's, you know, a personal choice, completely up to you which way you go, but just sticking to the principle of covering all the raw edges, you'll choose a piece of fabric then that will cover as much as you need to cover in that particular section. So we might try that one there, and then when I get a bit further along, I'll have another piece that will need to cover this section as well. So I've continued to stitch and add fabrics as I've gone around, and what you'll notice now is that I've reached sort of the middle, and I've got a little shape left there with a leg on it. Now, I could choose either to put one piece on here and then leave this side to last, or I could just add one piece that will cover all that section. Because I'm going to add something else on top of it as an embellishment, I think I will just add one piece to cover all of those. So this is where, if you haven't done it already, you will need to turn over all four edges so that you've got all of your raw edges and your center hole all covered. Once you've got that done, you'll just continue stitching in your maze, or in your I keep thinking of the word circular, but because I haven't got a circle shape, I'm thinking it really can't be circular, but I don't know what you call it when it's a square. Something I'll have to try and find out. But that will be my last piece then, and I'll continue to stitch over it. Once I've got that done, I'm going to give it a press, and that will press out some of those little crinkles. But so here's my finished mug rug, all pressed. The city people often will place embellishments on their quilts. They might be religious symbols or have some other meaning. I have a little hexagon flower that I've made for another video, and I thought I might use a blind applique stitch to pop that in the middle, but it certainly doesn't need anything. It's finished just the way it is and would make a lovely little mug rug. I have some other pieces that I have done similarly and folded them in three like that, and just put a little ladder stitch on the side and a button and loop on the top just to make a little pouch, and you could use it for something like that as well. The back, you'll see, well, I hope you won't see any of my knots because they are all tucked inside in the folds. I managed to hide them as I went along. So that's the end of our mug rug project. I hope that you've enjoyed watching along, and that it's motivated you to try and do some slow stitching without the pressure of trying to do something perfect, but just for enjoyment. please go along and do some research into real Kawandi quilting. But if you need any of the supplies that I've mentioned, you'll find them on our website. If you have any questions, please reach out and send me a message. Till next time. Cheers. Bye.